How's everybody doing on this fine Thursday?
Yeah, getting by.
Well, I was worried my microphone or speakers were broken. It was so quiet.
Yeah, but we got from you, David, we got exactly the sound effect when like Jimmy Page plugs in his guitar right before the concert is about to start.
I heard that too, and I thought it was my speakers because I've been having trouble with my monitor. I'm like, is it up again?
All right, yeah. So I suppose I'm sharing today. I'm gonna follow the same rule I make when I'm making popcorn, which is you wait until the length between people joining the call hits a certain time, slows down to more than several seconds. So we'll wait for that trickle to slow, and then we can go ahead and get started. In the meantime, I'll drop the notes link in the chat one more time, and I invite folks to add to the agenda. I apologize. I'm supposed to solicit topics for the agenda ahead of the meeting this week. I was a little bit under the weather, so neglected to do that. So sorry, but I trust that you all will be able to improvise, and if not, we will have a short meeting, which no one will complain to me about. All right, it's starting to feel like we have a pretty stable group of folks here. So the first item on the agenda is new faces. So I invite anyone who is new. You don't have to, certainly, but you are more than welcome to introduce yourself. Say what brings you here and what you're excited to talk about. Yeah.
I assume I'm the new face here. Hello, everyone.
Great.
I'm Nusrat. I'm a third-year PhD student at NC State University, and I work in software supply chain, especially repository ecosystem study. So I met with Jeff a few weeks back, and I wanted to know what is happening in this group and maybe try to discuss some of the research opportunities that we can do in software supply chain, especially ecosystem-wise.
Great. Then if it's not putting you on the spot too much, I'm going to go ahead and add to the end of the agenda just a quick moment to summarize kind of previous discussions we've had on this topic, and then maybe brainstorm for a second kind of where we can go. Because I think many of the folks in this call would be excited to facilitate kind of especially cross ecosystem research. So I'll go ahead and add that to the end of the agenda.
That would be great.
I've been out for several months because of travel and conferences. So I'll reintroduce myself. Jonathan Leitchu. I'm an open source security researcher and formerly worked at Gradle. And I was primary security person there.
Awesome. Yeah, and anyone who would like to reintroduce themselves, that's also welcome.
I can go quick. I joined sporadically, maybe a couple of these, so I haven't been to many of these, but my name is Philip. I'm at GitHub on the package security team. So we are currently working on a project to bring salsa provenance to NPM packages. And we've currently staff shipped this internally. So we're looking at a beta in the next quarter. We're also doing some work with the Sigstore Falsio project to try and standardize on some, I guess, the certificate extensions that are used for different CI providers would fill in with certain kind of signing identity attributes. Thanks.
Hey Philip, I'm Kira Carey. I work in Cloudsmith, which is like a package repository, a private package repository that supports most package formats. So we're really interested in what's been done here. Sorry. Okay. I was caught rapid there. Sorry. It's also my second last day before maternity, so I'm going to try to get someone else from Cloudsmith to come to this. I was wondering if, I know you guys are talking about doing support for maybe Python and Ruby, and because like we support loads of packages, we might have some insight of how that works with supporting more than one. If you ever, I can ask some of the guys to come on and talk about that if that's something that you think would be worthwhile.
Right. You know, I've sorry to take it off topic for a second. I have been putting off working on that proposal because it's a lot of work to be done on it, and sort of like, I know I'll just do these small things first. So yes, any additional input would be useful in helping shaping the next round.
Cool. So I'll try to get someone else on to come, and then hopefully they'll also know stuff about how to support loads of package formats.
Great. Yeah. Thanks all. Any final introductions or reintroductions before we get going?
Yeah, I could do that. So I'm Chaitanya from GitHub again. Primarily work on packages and NPM. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, fun crowd. Thanks. I know for some folks it's a little bit early for you, so appreciate you joining. And then for some folks it's late. That's the exciting thing about working on something that everyone around the world works on. So we're super happy to have all of you here. Yeah, and then I think we can get moving onto the kind of business section of the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jacques to start up. Feel free again to keep adding stuff to the end of the agenda because I forgot to solicit that ahead of time.
Yeah.
While Jacques is talking, but also pay attention to him.
Yeah, I wasn't. So maybe I can turn it over to Joseph because I wasn't sure who was going to be here today. But very briefly, WebAuthn support for the user interface, like the GUI, the website for rubygems.org has landed in production. So for MFA, you can now use your hardware token, your phone Touch ID, your computer Touch ID, that sort of thing, to authenticate yourself as your second factor. This is really exciting because, as we know, MFA with devices is, to the best of our knowledge, so to speak, unphishable. So it greatly enhances security. And there are also people who are very enthusiastic about using devices or Touch ID instead of doing OTP codes. Next on the agenda, as it says there, will be CLI support. We're still sort of figuring out what that will look like. One approach is that you copy and paste a one-time code, like an OTP that we generate, and play it back to us so that we can validate you that way. The other one, sorry, to explain that a little better, you go to the command line, you say, I want to log in. It says you need to do WebAuthn, takes you to the website. You do the authentication through the browser sends you back, gives you back a code that you're meant to give to the CLI. The CLI plays that to the server, and then you're logged in. That's one approach. The other one is that we're thinking about is instead having the CLI listen on a socket for web requests, and the rubygems.org server actually does a redirect to localhost on that port and squirts a bunch of information to it. And that has the nice advantage that there's no copying and pasting. It just magically happens. But it has the downside that it's some fairly more complex to implement if you want to stay within the bounds of the Ruby standard library, because we have to use raw sockets to do it.
Cool. That's super exciting, Jacques. I'd like to explore a couple things there. One is sort of like, it would be cool to be concrete about the security improvements that we're going to see from this. You know, the sort of shorthand that I hear people talk about with WebAuthn is you know, quote unquote unfishable 2FA. So I was wondering if you could expound for a second on the security benefits that you're hoping to see here, and like the specific attack scenarios you're most excited about. And then also, I think this general problem of package managers often having constraints in terms of how many external libraries they're able to take a dependency on is also quite interesting. And I was wondering if we wanted to tug on that a little bit as well.
Okay, so I'll start with WebAuthn. There are two reasons that we were keen on WebAuthn. One is that there are people who just don't like OTPs. They don't like the business of loading up an app, getting a number, typing it in. They find that onerous and tedious, and they find devices or Touch ID much easier because it's just a tap and it works. That's one reason. Secondly, in terms of the unfishability, for those who are thinking that sounds impossible, reasonably so, the difficulty with OTP is it's still phishable. Someone can still fool you and say, oh, you know, go to this website, you know, basically put up a phishing website, harvest the OTP code for you, turn around and play it to rubygems.org immediately. You know, it's obviously better in the sense that it's not, you're no longer vulnerable to password leaks and so on, but you still have phishing as a vector for account takeover. WebAuthn, you're using a hardware device, and the hardware device itself stores certificate information from the target website. So it will only authenticate with that key to that website. So if somebody sets up a phishing website, fake rubygems.org, the key that's stored in the hardware device will not be revealed to that site because it's a different certificate. This is my hand-wavy explanation. But broadly, the reason that that's said to be unphishable is because they can't set up the fake website and harvest the key, because it will just not send that information. It will not authenticate to that different address.
Yeah, I mean, I think
second one?
For the purposes of this discussion, I don't think we need to go into the mechanics of WebAuthn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's really, really awesome, right? It means I can't set up rubygems with 2ms.org and then trick people into typing in their OTPs and just forward those on. So that's
or
I think,
Rubyjourn.
Yeah, exactly. The second point was broadly around sort of this general theme I've noticed, where package managers are often really hesitant to take dependencies on, you know, third-party libraries or so on, in the interests of keeping the implementation self-contained, you know, and not having to sort of bootstrap and say, okay, I need to install this package in my language using the package manager before the package manager even gets it or even exists.
Yeah, so at least in RubyGems, and Joseph, please correct me if I make any mistakes. The gem client is included, and bundler is included in the RubyGems standard installation now. So you get gem installed. RubyGems does bundle some gems. I beg your pardon. Ruby does bundle some gems by default, and of course it has its own standard library. But yeah, the argument is, if you know, how do you use gem to install gems that gem relies on? It's the first part of it. And the second part of it is it adds to code sprawl, you know, the number of things that have to be kept up to date. This is already a problem because there are a number of gems that actually get vended into RubyGems and Bundler. There's a small collection, and it's a very carefully curated set. And it has a sort of a parallel mechanism for, you know, keeping those up to date. And it's kind of hairy. So as much as possible, the code has to stay within the standard library or the standard gems. And unfortunately, there's no standard library or standard gem that provides an HTTP server. So in the scenario we're talking about, we actually open a raw socket, we, you know, read the lines, look for HTTP verbs by hand, that sort of thing, which makes me nervous.
I agree. I hear that, and I think, well, that's on the one hand, we've decreased the size of the sort of trusted compute base that we were working with. On the other hand, we have expanded it to include some crap that Jacques has written. Not to pick on you, but something that's just been a little bit less reviewed than maybe a standard library implementation or even a popular package. So I don't know that there's anything actionable to do there, but I was wondering if folks from other ecosystems have hit the same problem and if there's a way that they're thinking about it.
I have a question. You don't need an HTTP server. You just need a client, right?
No, you need a server. So what's happening is you've got the client that can talk to the rubygems.org API, and that's one thing. Okay. But the way you are doing this is that you are basically going to a URL that is provided by the server to the client. That's where the HTTP get happens from the client to the server. And then the server provides you an OTP, right? And to prove that you are who you say you are when you log in, you then present that OTP back at the next step. So the question is, how does the OTP get into the memory space of the client? And one way to do that is you copy and paste it manually. The other one is that the rubygems.org server sends a redirect to localhost, and in localhost, the client is listening and gets the OTP code that way. So it's a little roundabout. Like it's one thing that's interesting. It's difficult to work on the code and to keep in your mind that you have two different things that listen for HTTP, and that like the client fills two roles, and that there's sort of three parties to it, including the browser. So it's in a way like simple to give the one sentence explanation, but it gets fiddly as soon as you explain the details. And that's the sort of cause of our nervousness. It's like it's more complicated to implement that, but in exchange you get a much nicer user experience. There's also the fact that we envisaged in our prototype for SigStore gem signing, we did it that way. So we, in terms of like the conversation, the OAuth flow, we have to listen on local port to do that. So it's just like, well, we're going to be doing that anyway at some point. Why not now? So we haven't made a final decision on what we want to do. We do want to get to the socket, direct option at some point, but whether we do that first or whether we go through copying and pasting first and then edit later, we haven't decided yet.
Yeah, and I think this is oh, sorry, David.
Okay, so these are details I wasn't aware of. So thank you. I'm trying to. There may be a way to simplify this. I got to think this through a little carefully. Yeah. So I actually maybe this is just an appeal to everybody here. Maybe there's a way we can simplify it so that the problem doesn't. Because I love the idea of the CLI. I understand the putting a lot of code here. That's a problem. I wonder if there's a clever way to think this through so that it's not as hard.
Yeah, short of us, like writing a little one-trick HTTP server, which is kind of what we're doing at the moment. I mean, it's what we have is prototype code. It's deliberately like not factored, messy.
Yeah, I mean, if you only supported HTTP 1.1 and didn't do TLS, it's easy.
Yeah, we do. Well, I mean, that's the thing is that's fine when we're directing back to the local host.
Right.
That's fine because it's within localhost that the browser is sending that token. So we're not worried about interception. So we can just serve HTTP. We don't have to worry about TLS, thank God.
Yeah. And if you do 1.1, 1.1's easy.
Yes, it is.
You can do that with shell script.
I mean, our code is using like literally a string split. I'll dig up the link for you. Just give me a second.
Okay. But I mean,
yeah. Oh, and I was just going to say, I think it's important here to also like keep in mind, sort of the failure modes. Like I think a lot of the risk of implementing an entire HTTP server comes in some of the complexity. And if truly all you're trying to do is, pull out the WebAuthn, encoded token and parse that, and all the parsing's happening using libraries that you're okay with, and the language itself is memory safe, then a lot of the scary parts have gone away. So I think it's a manageable risk, and one you can totally think through and get comfortable with. But still at the same time, always the best code is code that you don't write yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I if I had my magic wand, then WebRick would be included in the standard gems for Ruby, since that's a pure Ruby implementation. And then we would have it, but such is not the world.
Okay.
Yeah. So those links, thank you for adding those. The two sort of prototypes that we have, again, emphasizing they're prototypes. They're not, we made the deliberate decision not to make them pretty, but they give you the idea of the implementation, how we've gone about it. And we're basically deciding between those two.
It does seem to me that these would be also exemplars for other ecosystems, because especially if they're simple.
Due credit is owed to NPM, from whom we took inspiration. So NPM at least initially had the copy and paste, but I think now have a socket-based arrangement. But if someone from GitHub wants to correct me, but yeah, so basically we were like, yeah, we need to do something on the CLI. Oh, NPM is doing something with the CLI. What are they doing? So we use that as inspiration for this functionality.
I just wrote notes. Did I get it right? First they did the copy paste, then they did the local listener.
I haven't looked at it for a while, so I can't remember if they had implemented it or were planning to implement it. So I would have to Splunk documentation. I would have to search around. It's kind of a difficult thing to search for. Like,
okay. Awesome.
I have a topic or question.
Sure.
The survey that went out, the repository survey, seems to have, so I added a bunch of questions several months ago around whether or not each of the repository, like the major repositories had been audited around, like, have they been pen tested? Have they had an audit of their, and no one besides, I filled out the one for Gradle because I used to work there. No one has gone through and added anything to those questions under the survey document.
I think what's happened is that we switched to using a Google form.
Oh,
for the survey. So it's because I remember Joseph and I went through the questionnaire, and I do remember that question of like, have you been audited? What have you had penetration testing done?
Okay. So, and did that get ported to the new form?
Yes, I couldn't tell you where it is, but I'm sure if you like search in the notes here, you'll be able to find.
Okay. So
yeah. If you check the notes, I don't know that it made it into the takeaways doc, which is just because there's some sensitive information there that's shared on request by Brandon. And I'm sad that actually Brandon, I think, only makes the APAC friendly meeting times because he's the one to ask about this. But yep. if you want to go ahead, Jonathan, and follow up maybe in Slack and ask and tag Brandon in, I bet he'd be able to answer that if you aren't able to find the Google form that actually went out.
I saw the Google form that went out. I just, how I can't see the results.
Yeah. So the results, I believe, we're a little bit hesitant to share them too widely, the sort of raw data, because there's some stuff that's semi-sensitive in there. But that takeaways doc that got linked is we're sharing on a sort of as needed basis. But I bet you're part of the target group for that if you're curious. So if you ask for access to that, I bet Brandon will give it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was, my original understanding of that document was to understand the state of the world and then also leverage it as a way to figure out what organizations needed some encouragement and or resources allocated from the LF maybe to help fill in those gaps. And so if we don't have that information in a place that we can view, we can't help like know where that resources need to get targeted, or that encouragement needs to get targeted.
Yeah. Again, I believe, and David, actually, maybe I can pick on you here. Is there sort of like a like almost it sounds overkill to say it, but classification system for like some within security in the OpenSSF, we got open in the name, we want to be as open as possible. At the same time, advertise, blasting out to the world, hey, attackers, these are the package repositories that haven't ever had a pen test done, is something I think we want to be a little bit careful about. So I was wondering, David, if you had a way that we were thinking about that kind of information.
I mean, OpenSSF hasn't declared any formal way to do that. You might consider using the good old traffic light protocol, TLP.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
but the TLP is considered for restricted sets of or people joining call, and this is a very open group. So
there's nothing wrong with having an open group here that talks about, hey, what are the questions? Ask a survey.
Yeah.
And then a smaller group that actually gets some of the data. And we want to be as wide open as possible. But we aren't trying to the goal is not be a service to adversaries.
that is very fair.
So I think I think reasonable approaches is the goal here. Open as possible. As soon as, oh my gosh, we're just helping the bad guys, that's a different. I think we can be reasonable and move on. I would like to see some version of this as a public report. It's what I note in there. It does not have to say everything. Oh look, right here, attack. However, I do kind of riffing on this. Why create a more private version? It seems to me the next step would be working out how to fix that. So sharing with. I suspect certain organizations really care about certain repos. Obviously Shopify cares a whole lot of Ruby gems, and that's a great thing. As someone who also uses Ruby gems, I appreciate it. So, but basically having a way to share with some folks so that we can maybe, get people who are employees of certain companies to go work on it once they know of a problem, or maybe if we can't we can't find that, maybe we fund something or something like that. But, identifying problems is step one, but then we need to try to fix it.
Cool. So then I'm going to, in his absence, sorry, Brandon, give Brandon the AI to follow up there. And yeah, I think I would love to see something, some public version of that data, just turned into something, quick and I think a good advertisement for the work that we're doing, and also just a little bit of what's the state of the art here. So I'll go ahead and give that to Brandon.
Because it'll also be nice to come back in a year or two and do it again.
Yep.
And see what progress has been made.
I am personally, like, my 10 cents on this whole thing is the repository hosts that are driving the so I think I've given this refrain in prior meetings, but it's been several months. Repository hosts are not commercial products, and commercial products, when they are purchased, most often have organizations that have security requirements requiring that when they purchase software, they're buying a piece of software that has been tested, right? Like, there are certain sort of constraints that get applied when the security team gets involved with buying a piece of software. When there are repositories like NPM, Maven Ecosystem, Gradle, Ruby Gems, those just get integrated into the organization without any financial money transfer. They just get used. And so there is never a incentive forced upon the repository hosts to actually get a security audit done of the the repository. And so I would posit that these critical tools that are being used across the entire industry as a supply chain for these massive organizations have never been most of them have never been pen tested before. That is my posit, and that is concerning to me, given how critical these things are. And so I see that as a pretty glaring thing to be addressed in the industry writ large, that just kind of needs some money thrown at mostly, and then engineering resources to fix the end result, the vulnerabilities that get identified.
I mean, just to brag for a minute, from Shopify's perspective, there's a team I belong to, which is partly that reason. It's like, we depend on this and we need to lend a hand.
That doesn't work when that doesn't work when the repository host is owned by a company, which there are several in this call, and they Shopify could come in and be like, we think this is important, and step in and be like, we're going to do this, right? But when the host is a company and not a non-for-profit organization, then you as Shopify can't just show up to Sonatype or Gradle or GitHub and say, hey, we're going to pen test you. Like, thanks.
Sure. I mean, we can't do that with Ruby Gems either. I mean, we Joseph and I get along really well now. We're friends, but like at first we were total strangers,
Right.
And Joseph's like sitting there like, who are all these fucking random, shouldn't use that word. who are all these random people like showing up all of a sudden and asking for this and that? So there's that. I'd also say that, like, in terms of things that take money, again, to brag, like, we've donated them $1 million to the Ruby Shield initiative. And what I've been sort of like hoping in the back of my head is that in other ecosystems, other people who rely on those ecosystems would take the hint that they should do the same thing.
When there is no financial incentive for these organizations to invest in these things because it's not part of an audit required to purchase the software.
I don't expect, Globocon member of the Fortune 500 to do it, but I do expect that people where they feel kinship with the ecosystem to be involved. So, I won't call out names, but for ecosystem X, I would hope that large technology. I mean, I already know that large technology company Y is interested in contributing, but I think they should step up their game and so on. So, that's why we sort of like went big. We were like, okay,
right.
we need to set the accepted standard of how a large organization supports a critical piece of infrastructure.
Yep.
Yeah. Can I suggest that
if anybody's willing to out themselves for not having gotten a pen test done of their repository, or if they don't want to out themselves, what do you think the barrier is for you? Or, if you want to just speak in the general sense, what would be the barrier you think that exists for your organization getting a pen test done of your repository host, the thing that you're hosting? Like, what is in the org structure above you?
Can I suggest that we revisit this question once we have access to the actual data? Because it's,
sure.
I mean, I hope, I don't think it is. I hope everything you're saying is moot because a lot of these organizations have, but sort of knowing whether that it's, 0 of them have had this done versus 99% of them have had this done versus 50%, I think is going to change the approach that we're going to have to take here. But I think your point, Jonathan, is well taken, that this is quite important, and perhaps the OpenSSF is a good body to kind of provide a coordinated push, possibly some funding on all these issues. So
I would love for it to be moot, but I don't think it is.
Agreed. But I think we're gonna be able to have a much more intelligent conversation.
Yes.
Once we kind of have this data actually available. So I'm gonna propose that you go ahead, Jonathan, and ask Brandon specifically this question, and then hopefully we can get the two of you in the same meeting at some point, and at that point let's talk strategy about going ahead and trying to use the OpenSSF to push on this.
I can also contribute quickly. Sorry.
Yeah.
The RubyGems itself, speaking of the rubygems.org, there's no barrier to pen test. It's open source. You can even run it locally, so anyone can do anything. We also see it a lot of on Hackerspace and HackerOne, since we see a lot of. So it's actually like in theory, like constantly pen tested by volunteers around, try to hunt the bug prize money. But what concerns me actually is something different. There's a lot of small open source private hosting services, which are really run by small team having no visibility. So I think nobody's really pen testing this in this way, and it's actually more critical since it's mostly used for hosting private gems in private way, right? So I think those should take some care as well from the community. Since they are open source, but not really getting attention, right? And it can be critical part of some private infrastructure. They're just mimicking the RubyGems API, right? But doing it on its own under some password and stuff to keep things private. So we should consider including those projects as well if you would like to do some next steps on this in general.
If I may quickly comment back, I think that if the code itself is open source, that helps a lot. But obviously, you can configure something. You can deploy something and configure it in a way that was insecure, even if the code itself wasn't. So there's still value in doing pen testing, even if somebody reviewed the code from the point of view of how's it working in operations. Of course, just because the code's open source doesn't mean anybody actually did a pen test of the code either. So.
Yeah, that's clear. But the RubyGems.org, even it's open source, it's not meant to run local instance for any like company.
Yeah.
There are different projects to host the private gems, as I mentioned. So those should be considered probably as well to some audits if we decide to do something in general.
Yeah.
Even the RubyGems organization itself is providing example gem server implementation, which is called Gemstash. So this can be also the object of some pen testing if possible. Does the one recommended if you would like to host gems privately on your own, like custom deployment?
And if I can zoom, sorry, even further out for a second, I know there's some new faces on the call, and sorry, we should have done this earlier. But just for quick context, one of the things that's come out of this group that I think a lot of us have been really excited about is there is not like one spreadsheet that says, okay, NPM has implemented 2FA and it's optional, and RubyGems has implemented 2FA and it supports these methods, and so like there's not one at a glance like this is the state of various open source package repositories and their ownership and like all that information, which feels relatively standard, and like something that I would love to know. Oh, X% of the top open source package repositories support some form of 2FA or whatever the access is. And I see some nods, I think, from the academic folks on the call who especially can see how this is interesting, but also from a sort of industry perspective and trying to put our resources to the best use. We just wanted to have at a glance, what does this all look like? And I think it's useful for making really informative decisions, like exactly what Jonathan was getting at, where if we know 0 of these have had pen tests done, that feels like maybe a good way, like a good place for the OpenSSF to step in and have a broad push for all that sort of stuff. So to that end, we sort of sent out to a number of different open source repositories, basically a survey that asks a bunch of questions about various security controls and practices and so on. We decided we would, I think where we've landed with that, we talked for a moment about sort of the sensitivity of that data. Where we've landed is roughly, it's not public, right? We don't want a link to go around that literally anyone can access. But it should be pretty easy if you can, authenticate yourself as a researcher to get access. And we're picking a bunch on Brandon, who's not here, but Brandon Lum over at Google was the one who put together that survey and has been kind of instrumental there. He's had a lot of help, but he's been kind of the main driver there. So yeah, so that information, I think we're starting to see why it's useful. But yeah, I think getting access directly to that will help a whole bunch in terms of answering a lot of these questions that we're having.
I have a sneaking suspicion that some part of this will carrot and stick, and if it's not public, stick is harder, or but it's also hard to get the information out of these organizations and being willing for them to share that information.
If you use a stick, people will just stop talking to you.
Yeah, right, exactly. So no, I agree. So management of companies have priorities. Most of those priorities are targeted at getting more sales. This is not necessarily directly related to like that. And so so I think I'm looping, and I'm sorry for that. But yeah, so I sent a message to Brandon, and hopefully I'll get access to that data. But I don't know how we can make that I'm struggling with how to actually turn it into something actionable, and we can continue to talk about that a little bit more. So that was the primary reason for switching from the spreadsheet to the form was to get the package ecosystem maintainers to be more willing to share more details more privately. Like that was the general concept there.
Yeah, I never thought about it, but that makes sense.
I think I'd have to.
So I just want to give a time check as well.
Yep.
I want to make sure we have time to get to Zach talking about other data gathering that we want to do.
Yeah, it's a little bit related. So I'll tell you what, in another couple of minutes, I'll hard fork over and to that topic of discussion. Yeah. Or not, or we can do that now, and if it circles back around to, because I think there's a lot of relationship. So this survey is, I think, one example of one of the really great potential uses of this working group and getting all these folks in a room, which is to say we can sort of collect broad cross-ecosystem data. And there's a couple of purposes for that. The sort of most abstract purpose is just understanding what the world looks like today and what people have planned. And that has a couple of downstream uses. One is, again, from the perspective of the OpenSSF, can we use this group to coordinate and to possibly provide funding for security initiatives? Can we share and peer pressure folks into saying, again, we can't do this if the data is all public, but we can selectively make data public and say, hey, 7 out of the 8 biggest repositories all have 2FA and 1 out of the 8 does not, and nudge, nudge, perhaps you should too. But then also just from a sort of abstract understanding, I know we have at least one PhD student on this call, so you can certainly appreciate this. But just this could be a really cool, I think, data set in terms of understanding the security of the open source ecosystem writ large. And so the survey is one example of that. There's a number of other things that are very similar in that they are slightly sensitive in that we don't necessarily want to hand them out to people who are attackers, but they're not super sensitive in that we are willing to have tens or hundreds of people know them. And so one of them is for instance, data on yanked packages. And that's due to either copyright or mostly of interest to this group, suspicion of being malware. A lot of that information is not available publicly, but kind of is available publicly. So for instance, if you scrape NPM every day, you're going to be able to notice, oh, this package was here today and it's gone tomorrow. I have a hunch about why that might be. And so that information right now is not made available in any easy to consume format, but it is quite interesting, I think, to researchers interested in sort of malware. And so we've talked about the OpenSSF as being a mechanism by which to distribute that. Similarly, PyPI does a really, really great job, and RubyGems does too, via a different platform of distributing information about package downloads and package uploads. But the formats are different, so then it's kind of a pain to make cross-ecosystem comparison. So we've talked also about the OpenSSF as a sort of common platform via which to distribute that data. Where are we with that? Yeah, and David in the notes suggests that maybe we write a status report. I don't know that we're even there. Where we're at largely is we've talked about how it would be a good idea and how everyone is interested, but we haven't had anyone sort of in a position to drive this. And so there's a bunch of good ideas. And I believe at this point, there's a couple of other working groups that have also had roughly the same idea independently. Yes. And is my understanding correct that it's kind of the same situation where someone in one of these working groups said, oh, wouldn't it be nice, but I am not personally ready to volunteer a bunch of my time yet?
From what I've seen, yes. I mean, I'm also involved in the end users working group, and definitely end users working group had the idea to collect malware samples, and they were even more ambitious of getting to the point of having analysts and possibly providing a threat intelligence service for package repositories, which is, an expensive capability, but would be super nice.
Yeah.
If someone could tell you that, like, we're seeing this pattern on NPM, PyPI, RubyGems, Cargo, get ready, it's coming for you next.
Yeah. Well, I think as a necessary first step en route to that, you have to have all of this kind of data collated. And so maybe Nusrat, if I could make an ask of you, I don't know if you have to do this per se, but can you talk to folks in your lab and see if there's anyone like this? To me could be a cool paper and or good chunk of a PhD. So if someone wants to coordinate this, like there are a bunch of folks from repositories in this group who are willing to help. They're all overworked, but they're very helpful and have the right attitude. And so if you want to kind of drive that, I bet you could get a really cool data repository out of this. And again, to play up the academic angle a little bit, one thing that's really great about papers that make good, useful data sets is they're very citable.
Yeah. So can I have 5 minutes to discuss what we do in our lab, and maybe we can talk about it later as well?
No, I think that's on topic, unless anyone else has something they want to say right now. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so far I have done 2 studies in NPM ecosystem and PyPI ecosystem. So one of the study that I had, it was what are the weak links in NPM ecosystem, where we collected all the metadata. Back then it was 1.6 million packages metadata from NPM registry. And I was working with NPM GitHub and Microsoft back then. So we had access to some of the malicious package. It was an internship project, so I had access to the malicious package data, not all the data, some of the data. And after studying those metadata and malicious package data, we proposed 6 weak link signal in NPM. And one of the most known one was expired email domain. If some of you might heard about it, that developer may have expired domain, or maybe install script, which is very particular to NPM ecosystems. And one of the limitation of that study was whenever a package was malicious, NPM removed the package from the registry. So we did not have the original metadata, not all the original metadata from NPM to identify the pattern of malicious package, especially what are the pattern of attacker, or maybe what are the pattern that attacker get access to that NPM ecosystem. So what we have been doing for last 1 year, like Jack mentioned, we have been collecting NPM metadata from NPM registry for 1 year. So even if NPM remove a malicious package, we may have the original metadata if we look back. It's been 1 year that we have been collecting, and we will start the project probably from next semester. That's something I did in our lab. And another project that I just completed, it was with Scorecard, and I wanted to add this project as well, because on that project, what we did, we study Scorecard compatibility with NPM and PyPI ecosystem. The first goal was what is the security practice of NPM and PyPI using Scorecard security metrics. And the second goal was whether all the Scorecard security metrics are deployable for those ecosystems, maybe. So we published the preprint of that paper, and we had some media coverage. And one of the most common things we found from that study that PyPy, some of the practitioners from PyPy ecosystem were not happy with us because they think they don't use GitHub repositories, and this is not the way we should measure security for PyPy ecosystems, maybe. And we haven't heard back from NPM, so we don't know how they feel about it. So one of the goal that we can do here, reach out to those ecosystem practitioners and ask what are the specific security practice or pattern they have, and scorecard can probably implement. Or one thing that I think this group was also discussing, like ecosystem specific security practice. If scorecard can implement it, that's good. If not, then maybe we can do the similar study that I did with NPM ecosystem, identify weak link signals in PyPy. So right now my focus is all NPM and PyPy, but if I can get data from RubyGems, that would be great. But we want to access some malicious package from these ecosystems, and we want to get access also where we can get all the metadata for PyPy ecosystem. That's another struggle for us, because for NPM it is a little bit easy. So, and I haven't started study PyPy ecosystem, so I might be wrong and I don't have enough knowledge there. So any suggestion or anything, that it would be great from this group. Apart from that, our lab actually already collaborating with the scorecard team for different projects. And one of the project is how can we use scorecard to select good component. And I think I saw it in the survey, good component, especially in the dependency graph, how can we use scorecard and DevStep probably. And this is something we are planning to do in next semester as well. So that was another project that we are doing in our lab.
Awesome. Yeah, that's all very cool. And so I think there is definitely potential alignment here. I think if kind of this sort of common data repository that we were talking about became easily available, I think several of those research projects that you have talked about would turn into like SQL statements, which is not to be dismissive, right? Like they're hard work right now, but it would be awesome if some of those things, which were difficult projects, turned into basically one line of SQL. And the other advantage here too is I see a lot of academic research in this area that does kind of a case study on one ecosystem. And I think there are very legitimate reasons why you would do that right now. But it would be really, really cool to sort of test cross ecosystem validity. And again, I think sort of taking all of this data and putting it in common data formats would be really quite excellent in terms of enabling those cross, turning work that you're already doing and making it easy to compare across ecosystems.
Which is, yeah, to add my voice to that, my focus is on RubyGems, and part of my mission is ensuring or encouraging RubyGems to be included in research, because findings don't always generalize between ecosystems. I need to know what's going on, and I need to know whether we're in the same boat as other ecosystems, and so I can learn from them. If we're in a different boat and we need to row in a different direction, I can't do all of that myself. I rely on academia to do a lot of the heavy lifting. So anything I can do to make sure that RubyGems is accessible and easy to get data for, I'm on board.
I will definitely.
Oh, so I was just going to propose. So Nusrat, I don't want to, on your very first attendance of this group, I don't want to give you a huge project, but maybe a little thing that I could give you as an action item, and I'll follow up with you, and maybe we can work on this together. Would just be to write a quick doc, like a 1-page, 2-page doc that says, what would you, a researcher, want from a common data repository? Can you just brainstorm a bunch of ideas? And I think that will drive that, that's enough to sort of drive, come back to this meeting and whenever we come back to it because of the holidays. But I think that would be enough to sort of motivate and sort of say, okay, any effort to do this is going to require laying out some schemas for data to prioritize what data we want to talk to various repositories about the data ingestion, Where should it be hosted? We have some hunches about where that might be, but to just sort of outline at a high level, answer these kinds of questions. And I think with those goals outlined, that will make discussion between this and other groups easier. Especially also there is a group, I don't know that Guac is its own group, but there's another project within the OpenSSF that's also interested in a bunch of this data. They're interested in consuming this data, but they're finding that they have to create a lot of it, and that's where a lot of their efforts are going. And so like it seems like a lot of folks within the OpenSSF, this working group in particular, but other working groups as well, are finding that the absence of this kind of shared data in common formats is a real limiting factor for them. I'm going to take the liberty. I'll assign it to myself as the action item, but to follow up with you, and then maybe you and I can work on this.
Yeah, definitely. That would be good. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, all right. And then I think we're pretty close to time. So thanks for the discussion, everyone. I'll solicit last minute.
I had one other thought. I'm actually working on a document for this right now.
Yeah.
The one of the thought process that I had is, okay, well, you know, even if we can't get these organizations to agree to announce whether or not they've been pen tested before, if we can go through and like, I'm actually going through and looking at all the different package ecosystems and coming up with a list of their disclosure policies. And like if barring anything else, you know, the OpenSSF could allocate X amount of money and just hire a pen testing firm. And because all these companies hopefully have their own disclosure policies that, you know, would facilitate the ability for these, you know, an external organization to come in and audit them, we could, you know, theoretically leverage that. Now I'm seeing that some of these organizations don't have that, like, you know, in particular, a safe harbor policy that would allow them to, like, you know, not be taking on legal risk by doing this public audit. For example, Sonatype and Ruby, as far as I can tell, don't have a safe harbor policy explicitly yet. So yeah, this may be easier said than done in certain aspects, but I'm curious to do I'm doing a quick scrape and looking and seeing what disclosure policies are already out there that we could use. So.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, Jonathan, you're quite interested in this. So perhaps it makes sense for you to, if you have the availability, to kind of drive generally the pen testing effort. And I think that's going to include getting access via Brandon to some of this data directly. Sort of you compile your own spreadsheet that says, you know, this repository has had a pen test done, has not had a pen test done. Would we be able to just do it without talking to them? Or like, you know, and like, I think you could probably push to get some of these policies in place.
Yeah.
And I have a hunch most of them would be willing to work with you on that. It's just that, like, Joseph suggested chat that it's in progress, you know?
Yeah. David, well, I guess this is a long, well, money comes later. Let's have the data first. Yeah, perfect. Okay, that's it for me.
All right, thanks everyone. And then the last point before we leave is just happy holidays to folks who have holidays coming up, and to those who don't, enjoy the empty room. I think what's gonna happen is our next scheduled meeting would be on Thursday, December 29th, when everyone in the world is out of office. So I think then we just have the EMEA, so this meeting scheduled on January 12th, so hopefully see you all then. And in the meantime, say hi in Slack and we can coordinate there.
Yeah, and Zach, can you or somebody else send operations to remove the meeting so that people don't show up?
Yes, I'm not seeing it, but I will double check.
Okay, if it's not there, then that's great. Just I don't want people to rush to a meeting that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I will also tell people on Slack that this is not happening in 2 weeks.
They will be unsurprised. I don't actually see it on the 29th, so I think it's already happened.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Already done.
All right,
Thank
well,
you.
great seeing everyone.